The morning sun rose gently over Arlington National Cemetery. The air was cool, and a soft golden light touched the endless rows of white stones. Birds were singing far away, but near the tomb of the unknown soldier, there was only silence. People stood quietly, some with hands folded, others holding their children close. It was not an ordinary place. It was sacred ground, where respect was more important than words. Among the visitors that day was a man named Ethan. He was a tourist from another country, traveling across America for the first time. His trip had been full of laughter and selfies. He had gone to museums, stadiums, restaurants, and famous landmarks. But this morning, his group's guide brought them to Arlington. The guide spoke softly as they walked, explaining how this was a place of deep honor, a place where unknown soldiers were remembered, soldiers who gave everything but whose names no one knew. Ethan listened, but he didn't really understand. To him, it was just another stop, another site to record for his travel vlog. He had thousands of followers online who loved when he made funny videos. So, when he heard about the guards who stood completely still, rain or shine, his mind began to turn. They never move, he whispered to his friend. Not even if someone makes a face? His friend chuckled. No, they're trained for that. It's their duty, Ethan smirked. Let's see about that. They waited quietly with the crowd as a soldier in a dark blue uniform appeared. The tomb guard carried his rifle perfectly balanced on his shoulder. His face was calm, his movements slow and exact. He marched with a rhythm so steady that it felt like a heartbeat. Every click of his shoes echoed through the marble plaza. Step by step, he reached one end, turned sharply, paused, and then walked back again. The same distance, the same rhythm, over and over, without a single mistake. People watched in deep silence. Some recorded videos, but even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. The air felt heavy with respect. But Ethan, standing near the middle of the crowd, felt something else, curiosity mixed with amusement. He whispered to his phone's camera, "I'm going to make him laugh." His friend whispered back nervously, "Don't, they're serious." But Ethan only grinned. He thought it would make a great clip, maybe even go viral. He stepped a little closer, still behind the rope line, but close enough for the guard to see him if he wanted to. Ethan started making faces, silly, exaggerated expressions, hoping the guard's eyes would move or his lips would twitch. But the soldier didn't flinch. He just marched, turned, and marched again, each motion like a clock ticking perfectly on time. Ethan tried harder. He bent down and pretended to salute backward, trying to get a laugh. Still nothing. The people near him began to frown. A woman whispered, "That's not funny." A man beside her shook his head. "Have some respect." But Ethan ignored them. He was caught up in the thought of likes and comments. "They'll love this online," he murmured. He tossed his hat toward the edge of the walkway, pretending it was an accident. It rolled near the path where the guard marched. The guard stopped. The air changed instantly. The guard's boots clicked together with sharp precision. He turned his head slowly toward Ethan, and his voice thundered across the plaza. "It is requested that everyone maintain silence and respect." The command was not shouted in anger. It was firm, deep, and full of power. It echoed through the air and struck Ethan like a wave. Every conversation stopped. Every phone lowered. The silence that followed felt endless. Ethan froze, his mouth half open, his camera still recording. His heart pounded in his chest. He had never heard a voice like that, not a scream, but something that carried authority, honor, and pride all at once. He quickly bent down and picked up his hat, his hands shaking. For the first time, he saw the guard not as entertainment, but as something else entirely. A symbol of every soldier who stood between peace and chaos. Every man and woman who never came home. The guard's eyes were forward again. He adjusted his rifle, stepped back into rhythm, and resumed his silent watch. As if nothing had happened, the crowd still stared at Ethan. Some were angry, others just disappointed. His friend whispered harshly, "What were you thinking?" Ethan didn't answer. His throat felt dry. The phone in his hand suddenly felt heavy, like it carried shame instead of pride. He turned off the camera. He looked once more at the tomb guard, standing tall, unbroken, moving with perfect grace under the sun. He realized the guard was sweating under his heavy uniform, but his movements never slowed. He would stand there for hours, through heat, rain, or snow, honoring men and women whose names no one even knew. Ethan thought about that. He thought about how small his prank looked compared to the greatness of what that guard represented. As the ceremony continued, a new guard came to replace the one on duty. The changing of the guard began, a ritual that had been done thousands of times, every day. Without fail, the sound of their boots, the perfect turns, the crisp sound of rifles being switched. It was all beautiful, in a way Ethan had never noticed before. There was no music, no talking, no background noise, only respect. Ethan's heart felt heavy. He lowered his head and watched in silence. When the ceremony ended, people clapped softly and began to leave. Ethan stayed behind for a moment longer, standing quietly near the rope line. He looked at the tomb itself, a block of white marble engraved with the words, "Here rests in honored glory, an American soldier known but to God." Those words hit him harder than he expected. Known but to God, he whispered them under his breath. He finally understood. These men died for something he would never fully grasp: freedom, duty, sacrifice. They weren't names or stories. They were the reason the guard stood there day and night, never moving, never laughing, never failing. When Ethan finally turned to leave, his steps were slower. His face no longer showed amusement. His friend didn't say a word. They both walked silently out of the cemetery, past the endless rows of headstones that stretched like waves in every direction. That night, back at his hotel, Ethan couldn't sleep. He opened his phone again and watched the video he had recorded. He saw himself smiling, joking, acting like it was all a game. Then he heard that voice again: maintain silence and respect. The words made his chest tighten. He felt embarrassed. It wasn't just a silly prank anymore. It was a moment he wished he could take back. He turned off his phone and sat by the window. The city lights outside glowed faintly. Somewhere, he imagined, that same guard was still awake, still preparing for his next shift, still standing for people he never knew but would always honor. Ethan thought about the guard's eyes, focused, calm, unwavering. He thought about how that soldier stood there without moving, even when tourists like him tried to disturb the peace. It wasn't for himself. It was for those who could no longer stand. Ethan finally realized that respect is not something you fake for a camera. It's something you feel deep inside, even when no one is watching. The next morning, he promised himself something. Before leaving America, he would return to Arlington, not to film, not to joke, but to stand silently and show the respect he failed to give. That night, before sleeping, he deleted the video completely. His followers would never see it, and he didn't care. Some lessons, he thought, are not meant to make people laugh. Some lessons are meant to change a person forever. As he closed his eyes, the sound of that firm voice echoed once more in his mind, calm and steady, like a drum of honor. Maintain silence and respect. And for the first time, Ethan truly understood what those words meant. The next morning, Ethan woke up early. He couldn't stop thinking about the soldier at the tomb. The guard's strong voice still echoed in his ears. It wasn't anger he remembered. It was the power behind those words, the pride that filled them. Ethan felt something inside him that he had not felt in a long time, guilt mixed with respect. He realized that what he had done was wrong, and it bothered him deeply. He looked at his phone again. The video was gone, deleted the night before, but the memory stayed. He felt restless. It didn't feel right to just forget what happened and move on like nothing had changed. He needed to go back. He wanted to face that place again, not as a tourist, but as someone who finally understood what it meant to honor something sacred. Ethan left his hotel early. The sky was still pink with dawn. He walked quietly through the streets, carrying nothing but a small flower he had bought from a street vendor. He didn't bring his camera or his phone out this time. He didn't want proof or attention. He only wanted peace. When he arrived at Arlington, the air was cool and calm. There were fewer people than the day before. The sound of birds and the rustle of leaves filled the background. He walked slowly up the path, his eyes moving over the long rows of white headstones. Each one was perfectly placed, and each one told a story without words. Ethan felt humble as he walked past them. He finally reached the tomb of the unknown soldier again. The same quiet atmosphere surrounded it. The guard was already there, walking with perfect timing, rifle on his shoulder, head held high. Ethan stood behind the rope line, watching in silence. He didn't move, didn't speak. For several minutes, he just stood there and observed every small detail. The shine on the guard's shoes, the exact number of steps, the smooth turn at the end, the pause, and then the return. Everything was done with care and discipline. Nearby, an older man stood with a folded American flag under his arm. His hair was gray, and his posture was straight. Ethan thought he might be a veteran. The man noticed him watching quietly and nodded in greeting. Ethan nodded back. After a few minutes, the veteran spoke softly. "You're visiting alone today?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir. I came here yesterday, but I made a mistake." The man looked at him kindly. "You're not the first to misunderstand. Most people don't realize what this place means until they see it for themselves." Ethan looked toward the guard again. "I thought it was a performance. I didn't know it was real duty." I tried to make him react, but he didn't even move. Then he spoke, and I realized I was wrong. The old man smiled faintly. "That voice, it carries more than just words. It carries the weight of every soldier who gave everything. That's why he guards the tomb. Not for fame, not for people to watch, but because someone has to remember." Ethan swallowed hard. His eyes stayed on the guard. "I came back because I wanted to say sorry. Not to him directly, but here, in silence." The veteran nodded slowly. "That's a good start, son. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any apology." Ethan stood there for a long time. The wind moved gently, carrying the faint sound of the guard's boots striking the stone. Time seemed slower. Every step the guard took felt like a heartbeat of the nation itself. When the ceremony for the changing of the guard began, Ethan watched carefully. He saw how each motion was perfect, every salute, every step. The soldiers faced each other with precision and respect. The sound of the rifles switching shoulders echoed clearly in the air. The audience remained quiet. Ethan could feel the emotion rise in his chest. After the ceremony, the crowd started to leave. Ethan stayed behind. He walked toward a small area nearby where people left flowers and notes. He placed the single flower he had brought down gently near the marble steps. He didn't speak, but inside his heart he said a simple line, "I'm sorry, and thank you." He stepped back and looked at the words engraved on the tomb again. "Here rests an honored glory, an American soldier known but to God." The simplicity of the words held more meaning than any speech he had ever heard. He stood there quietly, his hands behind his back, his eyes wet but calm. The same veteran walked over to him again. "You know," he said softly, "these guards come from one of the toughest training programs in the military. They memorize names of fallen soldiers. They practice for months. And even a single mistake is not allowed. When they guard, they do it in storms, snow, or heat. They never stop. Day or night, someone is always here." Ethan listened carefully. "That's incredible," he said. "I never knew that. I thought they were just there for tourists." The veteran shook his head gently. "No, son. They're there for the soldiers who can't be here anymore. For those who can't stand watch themselves. And for the families who come here, knowing their loved one's name was never found. That guard stands for all of them." Ethan looked down. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "Then I guess yesterday I disrespected more than just one man." The veteran placed a hand on his shoulder. "You made a mistake, but you learned. That's what matters. Most people just walk away without thinking twice. But you came back." They stood there together for a while, watching the next guard take position. The sun rose higher, making the marble glow softly. A small group of school children arrived, their teacher explaining what they were seeing. Ethan watched how even the children whispered. No one had to tell them to be quiet, they just felt it. He smiled faintly. Something about that silence felt powerful. It wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. full of respect. Later, Ethan walked through the rest of the cemetery. He read the names on the stones he passed. Some were from wars he had only read about in books. Some were from just a few years ago. Every headstone looked the same, no matter who the person was. It struck him deeply. In this place, everyone was equal. Rank, race, background, none of that mattered. Only sacrifice did. He found a bench under a tree and sat for a while. The air smelled of grass and stone. He felt peaceful. A young couple walked past holding hands. A little boy ran ahead of them carrying a small flag. A woman stood at a grave with tears in her eyes, whispering softly to the name carved in stone. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He remembered how he had once laughed in this same place. Now the thought made him close his eyes in shame. But instead of pain, he also felt gratitude, because he had learned something important. Respect isn't given only to people, you know. It's something you give because of what others stood for. Before he left, he returned to the tomb one more time. The guard was still there, unshaken, walking in rhythm under the bright sky. Ethan took off his hat and stood silently with his hand over his heart. He didn't need to say anything. The guard didn't look at him, didn't react, and yet Ethan felt as if something passed between them. A quiet understanding. He stayed that way for several minutes. Then he turned and began to walk away, his steps slow, his heart calm. As he reached the gates of the cemetery, he saw a small gift shop. Inside, they sold flags, books, and medals. Ethan bought a small replica coin that had an engraving of the tomb guard on one side, and the words honor and respect on the other. He kept it in his pocket. It wasn't just a souvenir, it was a reminder. When Ethan returned to his country weeks later, his friends asked about his trip. They wanted to hear about the big cities, the food, and the sights. But when they asked what moment he would never forget, Ethan didn't talk about New York or Los Angeles or the Grand Canyon. He told them about Arlington. He told them about a man who stood in silence to honor soldiers, whose names the world would never know. His voice grew soft as he described that moment. How one firm command had changed the way he saw the world. It's strange, he said, how just one sentence can stay in your heart forever, over time. That lesson stayed with him. Whenever he visited monuments or memorials in other countries, he always showed the same respect. Sometimes he would see tourists laughing or taking selfies too close, and he would gently ask them to be quiet. He never told them about his past mistake, but he always remembered it years later. Ethan visited America again. He was older, calmer, more thoughtful. On his second visit to Arlington, he went alone once more. The same path, the same marble stones, the same silence welcomed him. He felt as if nothing had changed, only he had. When he reached the tomb again, he stood quietly and placed another flower near the steps. The guard marched in silence, just as before. Ethan whispered softly, "Thank you." He turned to leave, but before he walked away, a family nearby asked him, "Excuse me, can you tell us why the guard walks like that?" Ethan smiled gently. "Because every step means something," he said. "It's not for show, it's for honor." As he walked away, he touched the coin in his pocket, the one with the words honor and respect. It had been years since that first visit, but the message never faded. Ethan had come as a tourist once, careless and curious, but he left as someone changed forever. He had learned that respect is not just about silence. It's about understanding. It's about knowing that some people give everything so others can live in peace. And somewhere behind him, under the open sky, the tomb guard kept walking, steady, silent, and strong, watching over the unknown, reminding everyone that some duties never end and that true respect never fades.